Hi there, my name is ABonneson here to share my Advancing Equity Through Advocacy presentation for Ed 507. The purpose of this presentation is to promote justice and advance the cause of gender equity in the classroom. Gender equity is defined as the process of being fair to men and women, boys and girls, and importantly, the equality of outcomes and results. Gender equity may involve the use of temporary special measures to compensate for historical or systemic bias or discrimination as defined by UNICEF 2017. Gender equity in the educational context requires male and female students to receive equal opportunities, resources, and representation in the classroom. And while the purpose of this assignment is to advocate for gender equity within education, it's important to highlight issues of gender equity in our global society first because gender equity is a global issue. The UN Millennium Project 2005 explains that the innate biological differences between females and males form the basis of social norms that define appropriate behaviors for women and men and determines the differential social, economic, and political power between the sexes. Although the specific nature and degree of these differing norms vary across societies and across time, at the beginning of the 21st century, they still typically favor men and boys, giving them more access than women and girls to the capabilities, resources, and opportunities that are important for the enjoyment of social, economic, and political power and well-being. So because this is a global issue, it's only fitting that it would be also present in education because gender equity is rooted in child development. Simpian 2018 explains that the obstacles that women face are largely societal and cultural. They act against women from the time they enter kindergarten, instilling in very young girls a belief that they are less innately talented than their male peers and persist into their work lives. So this is something that starts very early for young girls and then follows them on into adulthood. That inequity, that bias, that stereotyping impacts student learning, growth, and academic achievement. And then, as I said, it follows them into career opportunities. Bianchi et al. 2025 explains that after decades of girls showing higher performance in overall school outcomes and taking longer educational trajectories, a gender gap persists in STEM studies. Women remain a minority in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics tracks of university and vocational training, which in turn has an impact on gender segregation in labor markets and the gender pay gap. So what is being formed in those early educational experiences is following women into the society at large. And I think it's important to state that while young girls are being made to feel inferior, and it seems like it is a problem only for women. On the opposite side, then young boys are then beginning to feel superior, perpetuating those stereotypes that men are more capable than women, which then follows those young boys into their adulthood and career later on as well. So why is this an educator responsibility? Why must we advocate for that? Because gender equity advances society at all levels. And because it is something that goes on into adulthood, it must be addressed earlier in childhood. We know that the goal of all educators, all schools, all districts is that we want to serve all students in ways that allow them to reach their full potential. In fact, the NACCE 2011 framework identifies ideal number 1.5 that we are to create and maintain safe and healthy settings that foster children's social, emotional, cognitive, and physical development and that respect their dignity and their contributions. If we aren't doing this equitably between genders, then we are not following that goal or that ideal. When female students particularly are negatively represented or underrepresented or stereotyped, they may internalize those societal expectations, and that leads to poor academic performance and achievement, which we know in schools is not something that we want to see. With that, we know that the classroom environment is the foundation of all student learning. That environment that teachers create has a direct impact on student regulation, learning, and development. And so students that feel respected, seen, valued, and saved can then maintain personal regulation and then achieve greater learning outcomes, which again is the goal of learning. So what specifically can we do? What strategies are available to us? Well, at the building level, there are a couple ideas that I'd like to share. The first being that addressing educator bias through reflection and professional development would be something very easy to integrate. Teachers are already doing this. Buildings are already doing this in general for many, many other issues and topics. Abdallah and Musa 2024 says that educators need to examine their own biases, assumptions, and privileges. This reflective practice can involve activities like journaling, peer discussions, and self-assessment tools, things that teachers already do naturally with their other instruction. Pollock et al. 2021 explains that teachers who receive gender equity training may create more equitable learning environments for their students and become gender equity advocates within the broader school community environment. Again, teachers already go through a lot of professional development, so putting in gender equity professional development would be one very easy road to go through. To be a little bit more intentional about the gender equity in the building, school-wide programs that address gender stereotyping, bias, and gender-based violence, such as the Gender Equality Matters program, would be one way to put a gender equity lens into student conflict or issues that may just generally happen in a building when we have a lot of children from a lot of different backgrounds present. And then finally, highlighting some community partnerships with gender representation within male-dominated fields. We know that when the community, the family, and the school environment are all integrated together, students have greater learning outcomes. And so what better way to bridge that relationship than bringing in community members to present at assemblies or family nights, or just generally be represented in the school's community. Then to move in a little bit more into what educators can do specifically rather than at a building level, but more intentionally in the classroom. Teachers can examine curriculum, textbooks, and classroom resources to determine missing female voices and areas for future representation. This can be done through just general classroom checklists, using a family profile to look at what families are overrepresented or underrepresented, working with the school librarian to find texts that could be pulled into the classroom or to get more copies of to represent our students, and then just doing a personal library inventory to see what is it that we might have a lot of and what do we have none of or very little of. Another thing that teachers can do is build confidence and promote academic risk-taking in female students, qualities that are generally underrepresented in our female students in the classroom. This can be done through social and emotional learning lessons that support gender equity when they emphasize personal success, healthy competition, and a safe environment where failure is used to promote greater understanding later on. And finally, teachers can integrate activities that promote collaboration for all students, not just girls, boys and girls, while intentionally giving leadership opportunities to girls when appropriate or with increased frequency. So that might involve facilitating lessons that emphasize teamwork between boys and girls, goal setting, and then skill building over time, and then again, giving those male-dominated roles and materials to female students first or with increased frequency during those lessons. Now, with any social justice issue or just issue in general, there are going to be some barriers. And the first being, for this particular presentation, funding. We know that many schools across the nation face a funding crisis, and that has been ongoing and will probably continue to be ongoing. So what schools can do is utilize community volunteers. There are many people in a school's own backyard that will donate their time for free to come in and present and represent their field with students. Teachers are very innovative. They can create resources that represent their students directly or have their students help them create those resources. Buildings can apply for grants, host fundraisers. Principals or admin teams might consider using compensatory education funds to produce some of these materials or use a crowdfunding platform like Donors Choose. When we start to talk about bias and stereotyping, there is going to be a lot of uncomfortable feelings. And so a potential barrier may be educator buy-in or just educator resistance as a whole. So a way to counteract that early on is to have early pre-service teacher training about gender bias. So before teachers even enter the field or get their license, have it taking place in collegiate courses. Educators could participate in professional development. There could be PLC participation, and then possibly even a peer mentoring program such as practice-based coaching. Kransky and Steed 2021 explained that practice-based coaching has emerged in early childhood research as an effective coaching approach that is robust, individualized, and supportive, yielding positive outcomes for early childhood teachers and young children. And finally, we know that when the school building or the district has an initiative that they would like to see improved, there could be pushback from the family. And this could be a cultural or a societal or a geographical norm that some families are just uncomfortable with. And so starting off with having strong family partnerships is one way to alleviate some of that. Teachers and families having mutual respect and a desire for understanding that is just a community norm for them may also help, and potentially utilizing mediation practices such as the third space. Derman Sparks et al. 2015 explains that a third space solution is particularly desirable because it draws on the creativity and openness of both parties, to arrive at a new alternative that does not favor each party, or either party, excuse me. Now, while we know this, the school has a goal and the family has an expectation, the third space does not say that one side will get what they want, but it is a good bridge for both sides coming to a conclusion that is beneficial for students. Now, my personal and professional experiences with gender equity, um, my passion for that is really rooted in my experiences as a female only child. For much of my early childhood, my value and worth as my parents' only child, not being a boy, has been questioned. It's been questioned by my community, by my family, into adulthood as well, as to why. Why would I be my parents' only child when, of course, they would want a boy instead? And that was challenging as a child. And so, because my family structure was non traditional and it challenged social norms and limitations based on gender stereotypes, that has just made me all the more aware of the stereotyping and the bias that exists for my female students, especially in the area that I work and live. And so, on a professional level, the lack of female representation in my curriculum at my school, particularly women of color, has been very glaring. While the curriculum has definitely made efforts to include more people of color, most of them are male. And so that part of the curriculum needs to be changed or adapted to meet the needs of the students in my building. And then specifically, as evidenced in the graphic from the Minnesota Department of Education 2024, Crestview Elementary School has, where I work, has a significant decline in math and science proficiency for female students. I'd like to highlight specifically 2023 being a year where 40.7% of female students met or exceeded on the math MCA test. However, recently in 2024, only 36% of our female students met or exceeded on the math MCA, with a drop of almost 5 points. That is a sense of urgency needs to be added into our math and science curriculum for students. So how to address that? Just a couple next steps would be that we need to provide increased access to STEM-related materials and activities for female students and create spaces where females may engage with those materials without competition with males. In FLIR 2021, they did highlight that oftentimes when those materials are brought out, male students dominate the use of those materials while female students tend to hang back. Another idea would be to deconstruct gender stereotypes with students in early childhood programs through an inclusion of curricular materials that highlight women in traditionally male roles. Because we know the stereotyping is so pervasive in early childhood, it would be very important to start to deconstruct those biases early in education rather than later or not at all. So, overall, gender equity is an ongoing issue that can be improved by addressing stereotypes, societal expectations, and access to a lot of diverse resources. These are my references for your review. Thank you so much for your time.